It was a sunny afternoon, and the little music school was buzzing with life. Parents, grandparents, and children moved through the small hallways, their footsteps echoing softly against the wooden floors. The smell of polished wood and fresh flowers hung in the air, and there was a quiet excitement, kind of magic that only comes when music is about to be played. Today was special. It was a day when young musicians from all around the city were going to show what they had learned, and everyone had gathered to watch at the front of the small auditorium. A grand piano sat under a single bright light. Its glossy black surface reflected the faces of people waiting in anticipation. The pianist who was about to perform was someone the community admired. He had spent years mastering his craft, and every note he played usually left listeners silent and mesmerized. Adults whispered to each other about his skill, about how he could make a piano sing in a way that touched the heart. Children, on the other hand, stared wide-eyed, some not fully understanding, but feeling that something special was about to happen. Among the crowd was a little boy. He wasn't very tall, and his hair fell into his eyes in a way that made him look like he was always thinking about something. He didn't have a program to follow or notes to play today. He hadn't been chosen to perform, and honestly, he hadn't planned to even be here. But somehow, he found himself standing at the edge of the hall, drawn by the music and the curiosity that filled him. He had always loved the piano, even though he hadn't had lessons like some of the other children in the school. He liked to press the keys at home, making his own little melodies, simple ones, nothing complicated. But the piano spoke to him in a way nothing else did, and sometimes it felt like the piano was the only place he could really express himself. As the pianist sat at the grand piano, the room slowly quieted down. The adults took their seats, folding their hands neatly in their laps, and the children shuffled into theirs, some leaning forward in excitement. The little boy pressed himself closer to the front, craning his neck to get a better view. The pianist's fingers rested gently on the keys, waiting for the moment to begin. Then, with a deep breath, he started to play. The music filled the room like sunlight pouring through a window. It was soft at first, gentle and careful, but soon it grew stronger, more confident. The notes danced in the air, rising and falling, turning the quiet hall into a place that seemed alive. The little boy's eyes widened. He felt the vibrations in his chest, felt them in his fingers, even though he wasn't touching the piano yet. Every note seemed to tell a story of happiness, of sadness, of hope, and longing. He could feel it all, and for a moment, he forgot that he was in a room full of strangers. All he could do was listen. When the performance ended, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then the applause began, growing louder and louder until it felt like the walls themselves were clapping. People were smiling, some wiping tears from their eyes, completely caught in the magic of what they had just heard. The little boy clapped too, but not because he understood everything the music meant. He clapped because he felt something inside him awaken, a kind of excitement he hadn't felt before. It was as if the piano had spoken directly to him. Now it was calling him to try. The hall slowly emptied as the audience prepared to leave or move on to the next performances. Parents gathered their children, chatting softly, and some of the young musicians were congratulated for their efforts. But the little boy stayed where he was. His eyes never left the piano. It wasn't just a beautiful instrument to him. It was alive, waiting for someone to play it. He wanted to be the one to try, even though he knew he wasn't supposed to. Finally, he took a deep breath and stepped forward. His small feet made little sounds on the wooden floor. He looked up at the pianist, who was now standing and greeting some of the guests. The pianist noticed the boy and smiled politely, assuming he was just another curious child. But the boy didn't ask for attention or try to explain himself. He simply said in a voice that was quiet but firm, "Can I try?" The pianist blinked in surprise. He had expected the usual, a shy smile, a nervous shake of the head, maybe a polite decline. But this little boy looked him straight in the eyes, and there was something in that gaze that made the pianist pause. He could see curiosity, yes, but also a kind of bravery. A willingness to put himself out there even though he didn't know what would happen. Something about the way the boy said it made the question feel important. It's like a small challenge to the pianist himself. "Are you sure?" the pianist asked gently, crouching down slightly so he could meet the boy's eyes. The piano is very big, and it's not easy to play. It can be tricky if you've never tried before. The boy nodded quickly, his hair bouncing as he did. I just want to try, please, the pianist smiled, a mixture of amusement and curiosity crossing his face. He hadn't expected much. Most children would play a few random notes, laugh, and walk away. But there was something different about this boy. So, with a soft sigh, he stepped aside. All right, he said. Go ahead. The little boy's heart beat fast as he approached the piano. It was taller than he expected, and the keys seemed enormous under his small hands. He climbed onto the bench carefully, his legs dangling just above the floor. He took a moment to adjust himself, resting his fingers lightly on the keys. He hesitated for a second, just looking at them. There were so many, so black and white, all lined up perfectly waiting for him. It was a little overwhelming, but also exciting. He pressed one key, then another. A simple note rang out, soft and clear. He smiled. It sounded good. Then he tried a few more, experimenting with the sounds. A small melody started to form, something innocent and simple, yet beautiful in its own way. The pianist watched quietly, leaning against the side of the piano. He expected a clumsy attempt, but what he saw surprised him. The boy wasn't just pressing keys randomly. He was exploring, listening to the sounds, adjusting his fingers, and somehow, making something that sounded like music. The boy's confidence grew with every note. His small hands moved more easily across the keys, finding patterns and rhythms that made sense to him. The room, which had been filled with soft murmurs of the remaining audience members, grew quiet again. People who hadn't left peeked in, curious about the unexpected performance. Even the pianist found himself holding his breath. Watching the boy with a mixture of disbelief and admiration, the little boy didn't notice the attention. He was lost in the music. Every note felt like a word, every melody like a sentence. He wasn't thinking about impressing anyone or performing perfectly. He was just expressing what he felt inside. And somehow, even without lessons or experience, the music was flowing from him naturally, as if it had been waiting there all along, just needing the right moment to come out. Minutes passed, but it felt like no time at all. The little boy continued to play, building on the simple melody he had started. It wasn't complicated, but it had heart. The pianist, who had seen thousands of performances in his life, felt a shiver run down his spine. He had heard talent before, yes, but this was different. There was something raw and real about it, purity that no amount of training could teach. Finally, the boy pressed a soft chord and stopped. He looked up at the pianist, a shy but happy smile on his face. The pianist remained silent for a moment, unsure how to respond. Around them, the few remaining listeners were equally stunned. Not expecting such a small child to create such a moving sound, it was as if the piano itself had been waiting for him. And he had answered its call perfectly. The little boy climbed down from the bench, brushing his hair out of his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply. He didn't need to say more. The music had already spoken for him. The pianist nodded, still staring at the keys in disbelief. He realized that he had just witnessed something rare and wonderful, the first glimpse of a true, natural talent. And in that small moment, everyone in the room understood something important. Music wasn't just about notes on a page or lessons learned over years. Sometimes it was about courage, curiosity, and a willingness to try. Sometimes it was about letting the heart guide the hands. And sometimes it was about a little boy who dared to ask, "Can I try?" The little boy climbed down from the piano bench, his small hands still tingling from the notes he had just played. The sound of the final chord lingered in the room like a soft echo that refused to fade. The pianist stood silently, staring at the keyboard as if trying to understand how someone so young could create something so full of feeling. He had expected a playful attempt, maybe a few random notes, but what he had just heard was something entirely different. It was more than music, it was emotion, pure and simple, spilling from a child who barely seemed aware of the power he held. For a moment, no one moved. The few people still in the hall looked at each other, unsure what to say. The boy's parents, who had been standing quietly at the back, exchanged glances filled with surprise and pride. They had always known their child loved music, but even they had never heard anything like this. The boy, on the other hand, seemed calm. He didn't boast or seek attention. He simply smiled softly and looked at the piano, as if it were a friend he had only just met. The pianist finally cleared his throat. "That was incredible," he said slowly, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You have a natural sense for music, something very rare." The boy tilted his head slightly, processing the words. He didn't fully understand what rare meant, but he sensed that it was good. The pianist stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Have you ever had lessons?" The boy shook his head. "No," he said simply. "I just play sometimes at home." The pianist blinked. He had expected maybe a few months of lessons, a child who had studied for years but still lacked technique. But this boy, this child, had no training, and yet the way he handled the keys, the way he made each note matter, it was remarkable. He looked at the boy again, studying his small hands. "Would you like to try something more difficult?" he asked. The boy's eyes widened. He had never heard that question before, not in that way. "I can try," he said softly, a hint of nervous excitement in his voice. The pianist smiled, carefully moving back to the piano bench. He lifted the lid of the piano slightly, revealing the polished black keys shining under the light. "Watch closely," he said. He placed his fingers on the keys and began to play a short, simple piece. It was not fast or flashy, but every note had purpose. The boy's eyes followed every movement of the pianist's hands, absorbing it like a sponge. He noticed how the fingers curved, how the hands moved lightly, almost floating above the keys, and how the wrists shifted ever so slightly to guide the sound. When the piece ended, the pianist looked at the boy. "Now you try something like that," he said. "Just listen first, then see if you can make your own version." The boy nodded, climbed onto the bench again, and placed his small fingers on the keys. His heart raced. The piano seemed bigger now, more intimidating. The keys looked the same as before, but somehow they felt different, heavier, full of expectation. He remembered the sound of the melody the pianist had just played and hesitated for a moment. Then, slowly, carefully, he pressed the first key. A soft, trembling note emerged. He pressed another, then another, experimenting, testing how the keys responded to his touch. It was clumsy at first, and he knew it. The sound wasn't perfect, but it had character. The pianist watched closely, his expression serious now, not wanting to interrupt but feeling every small movement of the boy's fingers. Something extraordinary was happening. The boy was listening, really listening, not just to the notes, but to the space between them, to the rise and fall, to the rhythm that wasn't written on any page. He was learning not by being told, but by feeling, by experimenting, by allowing his heart to guide his hands. Minutes passed. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the clumsy notes began to form something recognizable. The boy's small fingers moved with more confidence, shaping the melody with a sense of timing and expression that seemed beyond his age. It was as if the piano had become an extension of himself, every note a word in a story he was telling without speaking. The room felt different now, almost sacred. Even the air seemed to hum with quiet anticipation. The pianist couldn't help but lean closer. He noticed something about the boy's touch, something rare in someone so young. There was no hesitation, no self-doubt in the way he pressed the keys. Every movement was honest, natural, and filled with emotion. He realized that this child wasn't just copying the music, he was interpreting it, adding his own feeling, his own life, to every note. The boy played for what felt like hours, though in reality, it was only a few minutes. The melody grew richer, more complex, as he experimented with patterns he had never learned. Discovering harmonies that surprised even him, his eyes sparkled, not with pride, but with wonder. He was exploring, creating, and discovering the piano for the first time in a deeper way. Finally, he stopped, breathing heavily, his small hands hovering above the keys. He looked at the pianist with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. Did I do it right?" he asked softly. The pianist shook his head slowly, still speechless. "You did more than right," he said, voice trembling slightly. "You made music? That's more important than anything else." The boy's parents, who had been watching silently, could hardly believe their ears. Their child, who had never had lessons, had just created something that sounded like a trained musician. The pianist motioned for the boy to come closer. "I want to show you something," he said. He led him to the side of the piano, pointing to a small sheet of music. "This is called a simple exercise. It's used to train hands, fingers, and memory. But I don't want you to follow it exactly. I want you to play it your way. Feel it your way." The boy's eyes lit up. He had seen music sheets before, but he had never really tried to follow them. They looked like puzzles, lines and dots, that didn't mean much until someone explained them. Now, with the pianist guiding him, they became a new kind of challenge, a new way to explore. He placed his fingers on the keys and started. At first, it was slow, careful. He stumbled a few times, hitting the wrong notes, his small hands unsure of how to reach some keys. But he didn't give up. Each time he made a mistake, he listened, corrected himself, and tried again. Slowly, the music began to flow. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and it was his. The pianist watched silently, amazed. He had taught hundreds of students, some of them very talented, some of them disciplined, some of them naturally gifted. But he had never seen anyone approach learning in this way. This child didn't care about technique or impressing anyone. He cared about the sound, about the feeling, about the connection between his hands and the piano. That was what made him special, what made his playing so moving. Time seemed to slip away. The boy played and experimented, lost in the music. He discovered patterns, noticed how certain notes sounded together, and even created small variations that surprised the pianist. It was as if the piano was speaking to him directly, teaching him its secrets in a language only he could understand. When he finally stopped, his cheeks were flushed and his small chest rose and fell with excitement. He looked at the pianist, expecting some kind of reaction. The pianist was smiling, eyes wide with awe. "You have something very rare," he said again. "Most people spend years trying to find what you can do naturally. You don't need to be told every step. You just..." No, the boy didn't fully understand, but he felt proud, happy, and even a little nervous. He had just discovered a new side of himself, a side that loved challenges and wanted to explore. No matter how difficult it seemed, the pianist leaned closer and whispered, almost to himself, "I wonder what you'll be able to do in a few years if you keep this up." The boy's parents exchanged glances, their hearts full of hope. They had always known their child was special, but this was beyond anything they had imagined. The room was quiet again. It's the only sound, the faint echo of the last notes the boy had played. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden light through the windows. It felt like the perfect ending to a magical afternoon, but the boy didn't see it as an ending. He saw it as a beginning, a first step into a world full of possibilities. The pianist watched him leave the piano for a moment, unsure if he should speak or remain silent. Then he smiled softly. The boy had shown him something important, that music was not about perfection or lessons or skill alone. It was about courage, curiosity, and the willingness to try. And sometimes it took just one small, brave child to remind even the most experienced musician what music could truly be. The next day, the little boy couldn't stop thinking about the piano, even as he ate breakfast, brushed his teeth, and packed his school bag. His mind kept returning to the music he had played yesterday. The way the keys had felt under his fingers, the sound that had come out so azite, was all still alive in his memory. He kept replaying the melody in his head, pressing imaginary keys on the table or in the air as he walked. It was like a secret world he had discovered, one that was calling him back. After school, he asked his parents if he could return to the music school. They looked at each other, surprised, because they hadn't expected him to be so eager. They could see the excitement in his eyes, the way he fidgeted as he asked. "You can go for a little while," his mother said, smiling. "Just make sure you don't tire yourself out." The boy's face lit up. He didn't need anything else, just the chance to be near the piano again. When he arrived at the music school, the hall was quieter than yesterday. Most of the other children had gone home, and only a few teachers were still preparing for lessons. The little boy walked straight to the grand piano, his steps light and hurried. He ran his fingers over the keys gently, remembering the way they had felt, and then paused. He closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and let his hands move. The melody that came out this time was different from yesterday. It wasn't just the one he had played before, it was something new, something he had created himself. The notes flowed smoothly, rising and falling like a gentle wave. He could feel the music in his chest, in his fingertips, and in his very heart. For the first time, he felt like he was not just playing the piano, but speaking through it. Each note was a word, each phrase a sentence. And he was telling a story that no one else had heard before. As he played, a teacher walking by paused and listened. She had seen many children at the school, but the sound coming from this small boy was unlike anything she had heard. She didn't interrupt. She just leaned against the wall and watched quietly, fascinated. Even the way the boy's hands moved was mesmerizing. He didn't rush, he didn't stumble. And every note seemed to have a life of its own. Minutes passed, but the boy didn't notice. He was lost in the music, completely absorbed. The melody became more complex as he added soft harmonies, experimenting with sounds he didn't know the names of. He was discovering them naturally, letting his curiosity guide him. Sometimes he paused, listening to a sound he liked, then tried to make it longer, or louder, or softer. It was like having a conversation with the piano. Suddenly he realized he wasn't alone. The pianist from yesterday had returned. He had been walking through the school, checking on students, when he heard the music. He stopped, frozen, listening. The sound that came from the boy was different from anything he had expected. It wasn't just talented, it was understanding, expression, and intuition all wrapped together. The pianist had played for decades, taught hundreds of students, and performed in countless concert halls. But this was extraordinary. He watched silently as the boy continued. His small hands moved faster now, but there was no tension, no awkwardness. Every note seemed deliberate, and yet natural. He was not copying, not trying to impress, not even trying to follow rules. He was simply creating. The pianist felt a strange emotion, part disbelief, part admiration, and part joy. He realized he was witnessing a child discovering music in the purest way possible. After a while, the boy stopped. His small chest rose and fell quickly, and a soft smile appeared on his face. He looked at the pianist, who was still standing there quietly, eyes wide with amazement. Did it sound okay?" the boy asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. The pianist shook his head slowly, still absorbing what he had just heard. "It wasn't just okay," he said, his voice low with wonder. "It was beautiful. You made it your own. That's very rare, even for adults who have trained for years." The boy tilted his head, unsure what to say. He had never been praised in this way. At home, people would say he was good, but no one had ever described his music as beautiful. It felt strange, but wonderful. The pianist moved closer. "Would you like to learn more?" he asked gently. "I can show you some techniques that can help you play even more freely without losing the way you make music." The boy's eyes lit up immediately. He had never imagined that someone would offer to teach him, someone so experienced. "Yes," he whispered. "I want to learn." The pianist guided the boy to the bench. He showed him how to sit properly, how to position his hands, and how to let the fingers move naturally over the keys. It wasn't about forcing the boy to follow strict rules. It was about giving him tools so he could express himself even better. The boy listened carefully, nodding, and then tried what the pianist had shown him. Almost immediately, he felt the difference. His hands were more comfortable, his notes clearer, and his music flowed even more easily. They played together for hours. The pianist would show a simple pattern. The boy would turn it into something unique, adding his own rhythms and harmonies. The pianist was amazed by how quickly the boy could absorb information and turn it into music that sounded alive. It wasn't mechanical or rehearsed, it was full of feeling, full of life. He had never seen a student like this before, at one point. The boy made a small mistake, hitting a wrong note in a complicated passage. He looked up, worried he had ruined the sound. The pianist smiled gently. "Mistakes are part of music," he said. "Even the best players make them. What matters is how you continue. You can turn a mistake into something beautiful if you keep listening." The boy nodded slowly, understanding more than words could explain. He pressed the keys again, this time letting the mistake guide him to something new, something he had not planned. The sound was even better than before, by the time the afternoon sun started to dip toward the horizon. The boy was tired but happy. His cheeks were pink, and his hands ached slightly from the hours of practice. Yet he felt alive in a way he had never felt before. The pianist sat back and watched him quietly, feeling a mixture of pride and wonder. "You have a gift," he said softly. "And more than that, you have the courage and curiosity to make it grow. That is what makes someone truly special." The boy smiled, looking down at his hands. He didn't fully understand what the pianist meant, but he felt it. He felt proud, excited, and ready to explore more. The idea that he could keep discovering, learning, and creating music filled him with joy. For the first time, he realized that the piano wasn't just an instrument, it was a place where he could dream, a place where he could speak without words, and a place where he could find himself. As they packed up for the day, the pianist made a quiet promise to himself. He would guide this boy, help him grow, and see where his extraordinary talent could take him. He had no doubt that this child would amaze the world one day. He wanted to be there to watch it happen. The boy left the music school that evening with a spring in his step. Even though his hands were sore and his feet tired, his heart felt light. He knew that this was only the beginning. There were countless melodies to explore, countless sounds to discover, and countless moments like today, when music felt like magic. He couldn't wait to come back tomorrow and try again, to see what new stories he could tell with his fingers and the keys. And in that quiet moment, as he walked home, he thought about the way the piano had spoken to him, the way it had allowed him to create something that felt alive. He knew he was just a little boy, but he also knew that in that room at that piano he had discovered something bigger than himself. It was the feeling that music could connect hearts, could express what words could not, and that it could transform even the simplest notes into something unforgettable. For the pianist, for the boy, and for everyone who had witnessed it, yesterday and today had proven something remarkable, that true talent, curiosity, and courage could create moments that no one would ever forget. And as the boy turned the corner, disappearing into the evening, the piano in the school waited silently, ready for the next time he would return, ready for the music that only he could bring to life. The following week, the music school was unusually lively. Word had spread quietly about the little boy who had played the piano in a way that no one had expected. Teachers whispered to each other in the hallways, curious to see him again. Parents peeked into classrooms, hoping to catch a glimpse of his talent. Even some older students lingered near the recital room, eager to hear him play. It was a mix of excitement, anticipation, and something else, a quiet wonder that seemed to hover in the air. The little boy arrived early. As always, his small bag slung over his shoulder. He waved to the receptionist, who smiled knowingly and made his way straight to the grand piano. This time he wasn't nervous. He had grown accustomed to the instrument, to the feeling of the keys beneath his fingers, and to the sound that came from them. Today, he was ready to explore something new. The pianist was already there, preparing the piano for the afternoon. He glanced up when he saw the boy and smiled. "Ready?" he asked. The boy nodded eagerly. The pianist motioned for him to sit on the bench, and as he did, he could see the anticipation in the boy's eyes. This wasn't just about playing notes anymore. It was about discovery. It's about pushing boundaries, and about feeling the music deep in his heart. The pianist decided to challenge him a little. "Today, I want you to try something more complicated," he said. "I'll play a short piece first, and I want you to listen carefully. Then, you will try to create your own version of it." He began to play a simple classical tune, not too long, but full of emotion. The boy watched closely, memorizing the rhythm, the pauses, and the changes in tone. He listened not just with his ears, but with his whole body, feeling the way the music rose and fell like waves. When the pianist finished, he turned to the boy. "Your turn," he said softly. The boy took a deep breath and placed his small hands on the keys. At first, he played the melody exactly as he had heard it, careful to match the rhythm and the notes. But after a few measures, he added something of his own small variations in timing, soft changes in volume, gentle pauses that weren't written in the original piece. The music began to breathe in a new way, alive with his personality and feeling. The pianist watched in amazement. This was more than just talent. It was understanding, creativity, and intuition. The boy wasn't simply copying what he heard, he was interpreting it, making it his own, and adding depth that even an experienced musician might not notice. Every note had purpose. Every pause felt intentional. The melody felt fresh, alive, and real. Minutes passed, and the boy became bolder. He experimented with different harmonies, trying sounds that surprised even him. Sometimes he pressed a key tentatively, listening to how it blended with the others. Sometimes he struck a chord confidently, letting it ring out loud and proud. He was learning not from instructions, but from trial and error, from curiosity, and from a deep connection with the piano. The room was quiet, save for the soft echo of the notes. The few teachers who had gathered in the back watched in awe. They had seen many children practice, many students perform, but this was something else entirely. It wasn't perfect, polished, or rehearsed. It was alive, raw, and honest. And it came from a child who had never had formal lessons, who'd only ever played for the joy of it. The pianist finally spoke, his voice low and full of admiration. "You are doing something very special," he said. "You're not just playing notes, you're telling a story. Do you understand that?" The boy paused for a moment, thinking. I don't know," he admitted softly. "I just feel it." The pianist smiled. "That's exactly it," he said. "Music isn't only about learning. It's about feeling, and you feel it more than anyone I've ever seen at this age." Encouraged, the boy continued. He began to experiment with tempo, slowing down at times, speeding up at others. Watching how the notes shifted and changed with each adjustment. He discovered how a soft note could make a listener lean in, and how a sudden loud chord could startle and excite. The piano was no longer just a collection of keys, it was a world of possibilities. And he was exploring it freely, without fear. At one point, the pianist suggested a small challenge. "Try adding another melody on top of the one you're playing," he said. "See if you can make two sounds at once that still sound good together." The boy hesitated. It sounded difficult, even scary, but he nodded. He placed his fingers on the keys and began slowly, experimenting carefully. His hands moved independently, one hand following the first melody, the other creating a soft accompaniment. At first, it sounded messy, unsure, like two voices trying to speak at the same time. But he didn't give up. He listened, adjusted, and tried again. Soon something magical happened. The two melodies began to blend naturally, creating a harmony that was beautiful and unexpected. The pianist stopped playing and listened, completely silent, his mouth slightly open in astonishment. He had taught many students how to play multiple lines at once, but he had never seen anyone do it this well at such a young age. Without lessons, without guidance, relying only on instinct and heart, the boy, unaware of the reaction he had caused, continued. His cheeks were flushed, his hair slightly messy, but his eyes shone with pure joy. The music was no longer just something he was making, it was something he was living. Each note felt like a word in a conversation, each phrase a story he was telling without speaking. He didn't think about being perfect. He only thought about expressing what he felt inside. The pianist finally spoke again, his voice almost trembling. "You have an extraordinary gift," he said, "and it's not just talent. It's courage, curiosity, and honesty. That is what makes music unforgettable." The boy looked up, smiling shyly. He didn't fully understand the words, but he felt their meaning. He felt proud but also eager, ready to continue exploring and discovering. At that moment, the little boy's parents arrived. They had been told quietly about his session and had come to watch. They peered through the doorway, their mouths open in awe as they saw him play. Their hearts swelled with pride and amazement. They had always known their child loved music, but now they realized just how extraordinary he truly was. He wasn't just talented, he was fearless, expressive, and completely himself at the piano. The pianist motioned for the parents to come closer. "Look at how he plays," he said softly. "He is creating something unique, something real, something that comes from inside him, not from a book or lessons." They nodded, unable to take their eyes off their child. They could see the joy, the concentration, and the passion in every movement of his hands. It was as if the piano and the boy were communicating, sharing secrets that no one else could hear. As the afternoon continued, the boy experimented further. He played softly, then loudly, slowly, then quickly. He tried chords he had never tried before, melodies he had never imagined, rhythms that made the music dance. Each attempt was a discovery. He stumbled sometimes, but each stumble was a new lesson. The pianist guided him gently, offering advice only when needed, but mostly allowing the boy to learn through experience. By the time the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the boy was exhausted but radiant. He had played for hours, yet he didn't seem tired in spirit. He had discovered more about the piano, about music, and about himself than he had ever known. The pianist watched him, feeling a deep sense of wonder. He realized that he had witnessed something rare, the first steps of a true musical talent, one that could one day inspire the world. The boy finally stood up from the bench. Stretching his small arms and yawning slightly, he turned to the pianist and said softly, "Thank you. I had so much fun today." The pianist smiled, his eyes moist. "And I had the honor of watching you," he replied. "You've reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place." The boy's parents gathered him in their arms, hugging him tightly. "We're so proud of you," his mother whispered. The boy smiled, feeling warm inside. He didn't need trophies or applause. The feeling of creating something beautiful, of sharing it with the world, was enough. He had discovered a part of himself that was alive, curious, and fearless as they walked home together. The boy glanced back at the music school, imagining all the melodies he had yet to discover. He felt excited for the days to come, for the challenges he would face, and for the stories he would tell with his music. He knew that this was only the beginning, that there was so much more to explore, and that he had the courage, curiosity, and heart to discover it all. And for the pianist, for the parents, and for anyone lucky enough to hear him, it was clear that this little boy was destined to do something extraordinary. The music that flowed from him was not just notes, it was life, joy, and the promise of a future filled with wonder.